Well, good evening. I'm your host, Robert Wilson, with Cowboy Wisdom Unleashed. And tonight's podcast is 7 Ways I Rise of What is Beyond. I rise of what is beyond because the frontier calls louder, destroying the museum mind. I rise because breath breaks the borders that thinking built. I rise because my spirit senses moves faster than my inherited nervous system's caution logic. I rise because the beyond is the only terrain where my sovereignty can breathe. I rise of what is beyond because the sense outruns the sentence. Intellectual voltage, erupting before thought can archive it. I rise because the beyond is never a destination, it's a frequency. It's a raw intimacy that dissolves every identity script, every emotional fossil, and every inherited limitation. I rise of what is beyond because the breath is my liberation, the demolition crew that snaps the museum mind binds and lifts me of perception and uncolonized lineage. Arise because the beyond is where inspiration, intuition, imagination, and innovation have room to ignite. As I rise of what's beyond, because the frontier is my native terrain, the place where my spirit frequency speaks without permission, without vocabulary, without the curator voice trying to explain me back into captivity. I rise because the beyond is the only place where I am never repeating myself. I rise because the beyond is the only place where I am sovereign. I rise because the beyond is the only place where I'm alive and thriving. Why rise of what is beyond? Why what? I rise beyond dissolving what is next that bypasses the museum mind because the beyond moves faster than memory. What is next rises from instinctual immediacy, breath-born voltage, pure wisdom, insight, and clarity. The museum mind can only retrieve yesterday. The beyond erupts before yesterday can interfere with today's heavenly heydays. You rise because your spirit senses outrun the curator voice and snap the archive's grips. Because the next is sensed, never remembered. The museum mind depends on thinking and knowing and vocabulary, identity, and inherited logic. What is next? What is above arrives through sovereign perception and the sense that bypasses all the museum mind scripts. You rise because the beyond speaks of frontier clarity, never in archived definitions. Because beyond demands sovereignty, never obedience. The museum mind is built from comfort zone obedience, emotional fossils, lineage reflexes, and cultural correctness. What is beyond requires breath liberation, instinctual voltage, warrior wise immediacy. You rise because beyond refuses captivity and pulls you into your sovereign terrain of fame. Why, what is beyond opens untamed liberation. Because the beyond is unarchived terrain. The museum mind can only curate what it already knows, yet in yesterday's meanings. Inherited nervous system reflexes and identity scripts. What is beyond has zero archives, zero exhibits, and zero curator voice. Untamed liberation opens because the beyond is untouched by memory and uncolonized by vocabulary. Because the beyond awakens sovereign instinct. Thinking and knowing are slow. They reference lineage, caution logic, and emotional fossils. Instinct rises before any of that can interfere. Untamed liberation opens because instinct is frontier born, breath driven, and incapable of obeying the museum mind's limits. Because the beyond dissolves identity and unleashes immediacy. Identity is a museum exhibit, a curated story built from inherited limits. The beyond shatters identity and replaces it with raw intimacy. Untamed liberation opens because immediacy is sovereign, electric, and free of every role you were taught to reenact from the outside sources in your past. Beyond awakens sovereign instinct. Beyond is a train your museum mind can never enter. No archives, no curator, and no voice. No inherited nervous system, caution, logic. Beyond is where your instinct finally breathes without interference. Beyond is where your sovereignty wakes up. Beyond awakens sovereign instinct because the sense outruns the sentence. Perception moves faster than thinking, faster than knowing, and faster than identity scripts. Your nervous system rehearses life. Instinct rises before the museum mind can narrate you back into yesterday. And that's and if you really witness your life and observe it, you're going to witness that. You're going to witness yesterday. Beyond awakens sovereign instinct because the frontier dissolves lineage. Lineage reflexes. The nervous system inherits limits, can never operate in uncharted terrain. Instinct becomes your navigation because nothing familiar exists to trigger old reflexes. Beyond awakens sovereign instinct because the breath becomes your authority, and breath is immediacy, voltage, and liberation. Breath snaps the museum mind's binds and lifts you into raw perception. Instinct is breath's first language. Beyond awakens sovereign instinct because the spirit moves without permission and the frontier never asks for logic, correctness, or cultural approval. Instincts become sovereign because nothing in the beyond rewards obedience. Beyond awakens sovereign instinct because the unknown is your native terrain. Instinct thrives where captive vocabulary collapses, where identity dissolves, where memory can never guide you. The beyond is your instinct, becomes your clarity. Why rise of beyond dismisses indoctrinated education PhD programming from the museum mind manipulation? Because beyond dissolves inherited vocabulary and captive vocabulary. Indoctrinated education trains you to think in yesterday's words and scripts. Beyond erases those archived definitions and replaces them with sovereign perception. Manipulation collapses when vocabulary loses its power. When your captive vocabulary loses its power, the manipulation and control of the past loses its power. Because beyond outruns the museum mind's slow logic. PhD programming depends on slow, cautious, lineage-based thinking. Beyond moves faster than memory, faster than correctness, faster than academic obedience. Manipulation can never keep up with immediacy. Because beyond awakens instinct over intellect. Indoctrinated education elevates intellect beyond elevates instinct above intellect. Instinct is sovereign, breath-driven, uncolonized forward foresight. Manipulation fails when instinct becomes your navigation. Because beyond dissolves identity scripts, education manufactures identities. Student, expert, scholar, and professional mindsets. Beyond shatters those museum exhibits and returns you to raw intimacy. Manipulation loses its grip when identity dissolves, because beyond rejects obedience as a survival strategy. Indoctrinated systems reward compliance, beyond rewards sovereignty, beyond reward and rewards sovereignty. Manipulation can never survive where obedience is no longer a reflex, because beyond exposes the nervous system's inherited limits. Education programs the nervous system to fear deviation. Beyond unveils those reflexes as undated fossils, and that's what they are. Our past is really outdated fossils when you really want to open up to it. Manipulation collapses when fear logic is exposed, because beyond unleashes breath as authority. The museum mind manipulates through thought, knowing, and correctness. Beyond opens your authority to breathe, intimacy, voltage, and sovereign clarity. Manipulation dissolves when breath becomes your source of veracity. Why self-help, personal growth, self-improvement, punctuated writings dissolve. Why sensing beyond rises of inspiration, intuition, innovation, imagination, and energetic liberation. Because self-help trains the museum mind, negating sovereign sense. Self-help, personal growth, and self-improvement all reinforce thinking, knowing, and a captive vocabulary. Them are the museum mind's archive tools. They teach you to fix yourself using yesterday's logic. As sensing beyond is instinctual, breath-born frontier or pure prowess. When the museum mind tries to improve, it dissolves the sense, because the sense can never be domesticated by techniques. Inspiration rises only when the museum mind stops interfering, because punctuated writing traps perception inside correctness. Punctuation is a cage, a cultural obedience mechanism that forces perception into a tidy approved shapes. It interrupts breath, fractures instinct, and collapses immediacy. As writing becomes a museum exhibit, sensing collapse. As sensing beyond is breath-driven, unpunctuated, sovereign, intuition, imagination, innovation ignites only when breath flows without grammatical fences. Because sensing beyond bypasses all self-help programming. Self-help and personal growth rely on identity scripts, emotional fossils, and lineage logic. Sensing beyond bypasses all that, rising from instinct, spirit frequencies, and raw immediacy. This is why sensing beyond opens energetic liberation. Inspiration erupts, intuition sharpens, and imagination expands as innovation activates the innate, genuine talents within you. None of these can survive inside the museum mind's improvement agenda. They require sovereignty, never self-help. Why change, heal, create transformation are captive vocabularies. Why? Because when rising beyond sensing opens, hearken, inspiration, intuition, imagination, innovation, and energetic liberation, because change, heal, create transformation are museum mind repair words. These words are captive vocabulary tools the museum mind uses to keep you inside yesterday's emotional fossils. Identity scripts they imply you are broken, unfinished, and needing correction. Rising beyond sensing dissolves these repair words because the sense does not fix, it perceives. Hearken inspiration ignites when you stop repairing the past and instantly inhabiting the frontier of your open range. Because captive vocabulary collapses when sensing awakens. Change, heal, create transformation depend on cognitive recollections, thinking, knowing, and inherited logic. Sensing beyond is breath-born instinctual sovereignty. When sensing awakens, captive vocabulary dissolves because instinct refuses to reenact museum mind narratives. And you're never going to think and know your way into the beyond because it's all captive and in the museum mind from yesterday. Intuition and innovation rise because they are never built from memory, they are built from immediacy. Because rising beyond sensing unlocks energetic liberation. Captive vocabulary keeps you inside identity. The museum exhibits you when you are taught to maintain. Rising beyond sensing dissolves identity and lifts you of raw perception. Imagination expands, intuition sharpens, innovation activates, inspiration erupts because none of these can survive inside the museum mind's improvement agenda. Energetic liberation is what happens when breath becomes your authority and sensing becomes your navigation. While inspiration, intuition, imagination open my clairvoyant eyes to witness the universe beyond. Because inspiration lifts you out of the museum mind's visual limits. Inspiration is never a thought, it's a voltage. And see, that's something about in electricity. Voltage is the power. It's a force. It snaps the nervous system out of archive perception, opens your clairvoyant eyes to the unfiltered universe. Inspiration is the first crack in the museum mind's walls, revealing the beyond as a living field instead of a remembered idea, because intuition is your native cosmic sight. Intuition bypasses vocabulary, logic, and identity. The museum mind cages. And see, that's the thing about thinking, knowing, and education. It's all a cage. It lets you see without thinking, witness without interpreting, and observe without distorting. Intuition is clairvoyance in its purest form, direct, hearkened perception of the universe beyond the mind's manipulation. Because imagination innovation opened the dimensional doors of the frontier. Imagination is the frontier lens. Innovation is the frontier engine. Together, they dissolve the museum mind's lineage and open multi-dimensional sights for you to witness your world. They let your clairvoyant eyes witness the universe as movement, frequency, and living immediacy, not as archived meaning. This is where energetic liberation erupts. The moment you stop seeing through memory and instantly witness through your sovereignty, your eyes shine and energize your whys. Why rise of look beyond? Why rise of beyond? And why that rise shuts down my thinking, knowing, memory, museum mind? Because beyond moves faster than thinking and knowing. Thinking and knowing are museum mind functions, slow, archived, and inherited. Beyond is immediacy, voltage, breath. When I rise of beyond, perception outruns cognition, instinct outruns vocabulary. The museum mind can never keep up with a perception. It shuts down because it cannot operate at frontier speed. Because beyond dissolves the museum mind's identity scripts. Thinking and knowing depend on identity, the curated exhibit built from lineage, emotional fossils, and cultural correctness. Beyond shatters identity and replaces it with raw perception. When identity dissolves the museum mind, it anchors and collapses. This is why looking beyond shuts down instantly, because beyond activates sovereign sensing over mental narration. The museum mind narrates beyond senses. And when you're looking beyond, you sense it rather than it's being narrated to you. Thinking and knowing try to explain, sensing witnesses and observes. Rising of beyond activates hearken, inspiration, intuition, innovation, imagination, all which bypass the museum mind's manipulation. That's what this is all about. Expanding beyond the museum mind's manipulation. Sovereign sensing becomes the authority and the museum mind goes silent. Why cowboy wisdom unleashed, energetic liberation, energized listening, politically incorrect inspiration, maverick questioning, and revolutionary revelations open the way for you to look beyond, because cowboy wisdom destroys polite captivity. Cowboy wisdom is a frontier of veracity, blunt, unfiltered, sovereign savvy. It refuses the museum mind's political correctness and emotional fossils and lineage logic. When cowboy wisdom is unleashed, It snaps the cultural range and forces your perception past the fences. You look beyond because frontier clarity can never survive inside domesticated thinking. As energetic liberation and energized listening bypass mental narration, and maverick question the terrain of yesterday for today's fame. Energetic liberation is voltage, never vocabulary. Energized listening is perception, never interpretation. Together, they silence the museum mind's thinking, knowing loops, open the raw sense, the sovereign channel that witnesses what the mind can never understand or explain. You look beyond because all liberation in listening operates outside the museum mind's manipulation. Liberation in listening operate outside the museum mind manipulation. Politically incorrect inspiration and revolutionary revelations shatter inherited limits. Politically incorrect inspiration refuses cultural obedience and ancestor obedience. Revolutionary revelation expose every program reflex the mind museum depends on. When these two erupt, they dissolve the inherited vocabulary, inherited captive vocabulary that once defined your reality. As you look beyond, because revelation breaks the cage, inspiration lights the path of your frontier as you travel through life with ease. And see what this does, it calms the mind, and you're starting to look beyond the thinking, knowing mind. And when you say what's beyond, you start feeling a liberation and a freedom, and you feel liberated from your mind. And I want to thank you. I am Robert A. Wilson, and may your weekend be blessed of fun and relaxation.